Hi.
Hi.
I was just trying to reach you 500 different ways.
Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I am so sorry. I stepped away for like 5 seconds. Someone was talking to me and I was like, I gotta go. I gotta go.
Next time we'll I don't know if there's a way to share the control.
I tried to add you this morning because I was like afraid of that. And it wasn't, it kept like telling me no. So I think I'll just give you, I think it's because I don't have a license for you, but I can just give you, this is like the Legal Mentor Network account. So I'll just give you the password.
Okay. Hi, Jessica.
I'm so sorry about that.
That's okay. Can you guys see and hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yes.
Perfect. I am coming to you from a vineyard in Paso Robles. Thankfully.
Paso Robles.
So I am keeping my fingers crossed that, you know, the wine gods will continue with the wonderful internet that I have been able to find access to. We play around with a bunch of different servers while we're traveling around the country. And every now and then I just got to use a tasting room because my stuff doesn't cut it. But let me make sure that my, Crystal, are you ready for me to share my screen? I just wanted to make sure that the slides would come up okay.
So we are recording. We have 14 people are here. Please take over.
Oh, actually, I need you to give me screen sharing capability.
Oh, did that work?
Let's give it a shot. Yes. All right. So let me share this and let me see if I can make it bigger for everybody. Okay. Can everyone see the slides okay?
Yes. It's your front slide, right? With your picture. Okay, great. Okay. All right. So I guess I should start with introductions. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm Amy Goldstein, chair of the training programs for the Legal Mentor Network. The Legal Mentor Network is a new nonprofit organization focused on providing free legal mentoring to law students and junior attorneys. You can find information not only about the organization, but also about how to sign up as a mentor or mentee on our website, legalmentornetwork.org. And now why we're here. We are thrilled to have Jessica Medina with us today to discuss how to handle law school debt. Jessica is a former lawyer turned accredited financial counselor on a mission to help attorneys figure out their finances so they can pursue their true passions. She graduated from Columbia Law School as a single mom of twins with over $200,000 in student loans. She took a stroll through big law and the federal government and now teaches other lawyers how to use their money to finance their dream lives. There will be time for questions at the end of Jessica's presentation, but feel free to enter them in the Q&A as they come up. And now, without further ado, it is my pleasure to turn it over to Jessica Medina. Thanks for being here, Jessica.
Thanks so much for having me, Amy, and thank you to the Legal Mentor Network. I think this is such an amazing organization providing really needed services to lawyers who could definitely use a mentor here and there. I am super excited to present today. This is such a timely topic with student loans and so many changes going on. Just to give people a sense of what we're going to do today, there is a lot of information to cover, but I don't want this just to be a teaching session. So if you have questions about your personal situation or just how things are going to work, as Amy said, she's going to be managing the Q&A for me. I am a wonderful speaker and a wonderful accredited financial counselor, but not a great multitasker. So I can't watch the chat and give you guys all the great information that you need. Also, some of your questions may be answered while we go through the presentation itself, but pop those questions in the chat. Amy will make sure that she's keeping tabs on them and we'll have time at the end to go over specifics. And so how to handle law school debt. Welcome, everyone. Student loan debt, we know this is different than other debt, right? We're not talking about, $2,000 on a credit card. We are talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars at times, especially for lawyers. And it's for lawyer in particular, right? The typical graduate has $35,000 of student loan debt, whereas your typical law school graduate has an average of $145,000. Those are two very different numbers, and these are just the averages. I don't know about you, but I consider myself above average, and so I graduated with much more than $145,000 of debt. Also, with student loans, there are so many different products, and the service providers who are supposed to help you manage paying them back have traditionally not done a very good job of educating their customers or letting you know what options are out there. So it's led to a lot of confusion, and we're going to try to clear some of that up today. Also, given the size of the debt and the type of debt that student loan is, paying those loans off as soon as possible is not always the only strategy. Oftentimes, you hear a lot in the personal finance world about how debt is bad and you have to get rid of it as quickly as possible. But with student loans, we want to be very strategic in how we attack them so that we are not letting them take over our entire lives. Hello again, my name is Jessica. As Amy mentioned, I am an accredited financial counselor, but I had a previous life as a full-time attorney. I practiced in the DC area for nearly 15 years, both at a large firm and then at the Securities and Exchange Commission. That being said, although I am still a licensed attorney, I am not your I know you attorneys get that. So I don't give any legal advice. I also don't give investment or tax advice. We're going to be talking about debt repayment strategies. We're going to be talking about, working on your cash flow. But for some of those other types of strategies, you want to be working with as someone who's licensed in those areas. As Amy mentioned, I graduated from Columbia Law School as a single mom of twins with over $200,000 of my own student loan debt. It really shaped the trajectory of my career. People have asked me often, if you hadn't taken out so many loans, would you have practiced in a different area? And sometimes it's hard for me to answer that question. There are forgiveness programs that are out there right now. Was in law school. I graduated, 2004, so coming up on 20 years. And the whole regime in terms of how federal student loans are handled is now very different. And I think it provides a lot of options for people that might not have been available earlier. And so understanding that can really help you figure out the right career path for you and how to reach all of your financial goals. But so like I mentioned, today we're going to go over some student loan basics. I want to make sure that you're armed with some basic information to be able to understand your own student loan. We'll be talking about different repayment strategies and what might work best for you. We'll also be talking about the recent announcements on student loan debt relief and the changes to all of the different federal programs, how to make your own plan, and of course, we will leave time for questions at the end. So let's get into some basics here. One of the most important things that you have to understand about student loans is that there's two student loans out there, and you want to know what type of loans you have. There's the two basic types that you have are the federal student loans and private student loans. So federal student loans are owned by the U.S. Department of Education. There have been many different programs over the years. That's why it can be so confusing to figure out what kind of loan you have. But you really want to just pay attention to whether the Department of Education owns your loan and is servicing it. One easy way to figure that out in this time period is whether your loans were subject to the payment pause that started in March of 2020. If you have not had to make payments on your loans and they've all been at 0% interest, you should have federal loans. So that's a good back of the envelope way to figure it out. There's a couple of different names that they go by: direct loans, direct plus loans, direct consolidated loans. There are some FFEL loans that are federal loans, but many of them are still held by private loan lenders. And then there's also federal Perkins loans. So all of those are federal loans, and you can figure out information about them on the studentaid.gov website. Wonderful resource for figuring out everything that you need to know about federal loans and federal programs. It's one of the best government websites out there. They've done a really good job of laying out information and trying to make it easy to understand. And then the other types of loans are private student loans. These are the ones that are owned by banks. They usually have variable interest rates. You might have gotten one if you took out a loan when you were getting ready to study for the bar. All of these are held by private banks, and they are not subject to all of the different federal relief programs that we might be talking about today. to figure out whether you have private student loans and where they might be sitting, you should be able to check any statements that you get from your lenders. You probably have had to make payments on those loans during this payment pause period. The other place where you can figure out where all of your student loans sit is by checking your credit report. So if you go to annualcreditreport.com, that will not only send you a list of all of the credit cards and all of the loans that you might have out there. You can also find all of your student loans and make sure, number one, that all of them are accounted for and that nobody has taken out a loan in your name. So it's a good idea to check your credit report to get the full picture of all of the loans that might be out there. Again, if you're trying to figure out whether your loans are private or federal, a good back of the envelope way is whether they've been subject to the payment pause. So the private loans, you still would have been making payments during this time period. So now that we know all the different types of loans that are out there, it's time to figure out, what do we do with them, right? We've graduated from law school, we're working, hopefully practicing as an attorney if that was our dream, but we probably have a large debt load that we're dealing with, and we want to figure out the best way to start attacking it. There's 3 different strategies that I always go over with my clients when we're thinking about student loan repayment. There is the repayment ASAP model. We talked a little bit about that. We'll be going through when that's a good idea. There are the forgiveness programs. Now, these just apply to federal student loans, so they don't apply to those private student loans. And then there's what I call the repay your way strategy. And we'll talk about what that can look like over the lifetime of your repayment. But when do you use these different types of strategies? The guidelines are, generally speaking, you want to take a look at what is your annual salary compared to your total debt load. The money from the year is more than the total amount that you owe on all of your loans together. You might want to consider repaying them off as quickly as possible. If your debt load is larger than your annual salary, then you might want to consider some of these forgiveness programs that are out there. If your annual salary is about equal to your total debt load, then you might need to come up with some creative strategies to make sure that you are getting your loans repaid in the most efficient way while also pursuing your other financial goals. We never want student loans to be the only thing that we're thinking about when we're planning our financial future. And I think for many lawyers in particular, they can be such a huge burden that they become really the only focus. We want to make sure that this is just one piece in a larger plan for all the different things we might want to do with our money over our lifetime. So going through the first guideline, if your annual salary is larger than your total debt, you might be a good candidate to repay your loans as quickly as possible. But there are many things that you want to take into consideration before you go down this route. First of all, to get your loans repaid as quickly as possible, if you currently have federal loans, you will probably end up refinancing them. Now, there are going to be many caveats throughout this training talking about how there are some things that you just might not want to do right now, given the state of the federal programs and all the changes that are currently in place. So if you are going to be refinancing your federal loans, number one, that is an irreversible decision. So we want to be very careful before we refinance any federal loans into the private sector. That being said, when you refinance, it means that you're going to be usually securing a much lower interest rate on your loans, which means you'll pay less interest over time. And that is the key to really lowering the total amount that you pay over time, which is why this can be a good candidate for people who have a salary that is larger than their debt load. The other thing you want to pay attention to is how long will you have this income security? It's one thing to have a great salary coming out of law school, but it's another thing if you're planning on changing careers or if you decide that law really isn't for you and you want to go do something else. You want to make sure that if you refinance, you will have the income security for the entire repayment term of your loan. Because once you refinance that federal loan, you're now in the private sphere. You don't have access to the federal relief anymore. And if you lose your job or you have to take a pay cut, still be in that same loan term for the refinance. And so you want to pay attention to whether you're going to be able to pay off those loans in the time that you've now signed up for. Lastly, we want to pay attention to, is this really fit into your lifestyle? Getting your loans paid off as quickly as possible is going to be a large and hard endeavor that will require a large monthly payment to get them taken care of. And so if we're talking about repaying, over $100,000 in student loans as quickly as possible, that's probably what you'll be doing with your money for that entire time period. You're not going to have a lot of extra to put toward other goals or to put toward things like daycare or, mortgages or other financial goals that you might have. So you want to plan accordingly for that. In terms of making repayment easier, there's two terms out there that people sometimes confuse in the student loan world. One is consolidation and the other is refinancing. They're very different things, but they have some aspects that are the same. Consolidation is a process by which you take a number of federal loans and you lump them all together into one consolidation federal loan. So when this happens, for example, if you've taken out loans during undergrad and you have loans from law school, you could have like 14 or 20 different loans, all at different interest rates, all for different amounts. A consolidation loan just lumps all those federal loans together into one massive federal loan. You don't generally get any benefit in terms of lowering your interest rate. They'll take your weighted average interest rate and give you that for your consolidation loan, but you will still have access to all of the federal repayment options. And so it is just a new federal loan. Some things to watch out for under the original way that the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program was designed. When you consolidated your loans, it restarted the clock on any public service loan forgiveness payments that were being made. So you wanted to be very careful about when you consolidated, if you had already made a number of payments that qualified toward forgiveness. That being said, during this waiver period, which I'm going to talk about later, that's not happening. And so this is a really good time to consolidate your federal loans if you still have a number of them out there and you're trying to get to forgiveness faster. The other thing to pay attention to is with consolidation, they can capitalize the interest to go into the consolidation loan. Capitalizing interest means that any interest that is separate from the principal of your student loan will be lumped into the principal of your new consolidation loan. So the principal will actually be larger potentially than the amount of money that you took out to actually get your education. And so you want to be careful about that, but depending on your forgiveness timeline, it could still make the most sense for you. Refinancing is different than consolidation. And like I mentioned before, refinancing takes you out of the federal loan world and into the private loan world. It is an irreversible decision. So you want to be very careful before you refinance any federal loans. But this will get you to private lenders and they will basically buy your federal loans from you. They will usually offer you a better interest rate than you're getting on your federal loans. You will have a new loan with a new payment term. The rub is that there are income and credit requirements. This is a loan from a bank, so they're going to want to make sure that you can pay it back in the time that you say that you want to. You will have access to all federal protections and a relief that's been offered. But if you are planning on paying off your loans as quickly as possible, in important steps, again, where we are the federal relief programs, no one should be refinancing their federal loans. So we need to wait until all of these programs have rolled out to really make sure that refinancing makes sense for you, because we had some people who refinanced during the pandemic and now they're not getting access to any of the debt relief that's coming out from the government. So you want to be careful when making decisions like that. And right now there's just so much going on in the federal loan world that it's not a great idea to refinance and lose out on everything that's happening until you have a really good understanding. So let's move to one of the most exciting aspects of paying down your federal loans, the forgiveness options. Again, remember, these only apply to federal loans. If you have private loans and you had refinanced previously, then you're going to treat them like any other debt in terms of fitting them into an overall financial plan where you are, paying down your debt at a reasonable rate. And if people have questions about, refinanced or private loans, we can talk about that during the Q&A. But the forgiveness options can be a bit complicated, so we're going to spend a little time in there. And remember, the forgiveness options are best for people whose total debt load exceeds their annual income. So if the money that you bring in over a year is less than the total amount of money you owe in federal student loans, then you definitely want to consider the forgiveness programs. There's 3 different types of forgiveness out there for federal student loans. There's income-driven repayment, the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program, and also teacher programs. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the teacher forgiveness because it's not really relevant for this audience, but if any of you anticipate going into that field, you could get additional forgiveness on top of what we're going to talk about today. But the 2 main programs that we usually talk about are the income-driven repayment and public service loan forgiveness. The income-driven repayment forgiveness goes by many different names. These are all income-driven repayment plans. It's something that you sign up for when you get maybe you get your first bill after you graduate from law school and you realize, oh my goodness, this 10-year standard plan payment makes no sense for my lifestyle. Why do I have to pay $4,000 a month for my student loans? That's usually a little too high for anyone to handle. So at that point, you want to consider the income-driven repayment plans. They go by repay, pay, IBR, ICR, depending on a couple of different qualifiers and what types of loans that you have. That being said, because of the time period that we're in, the federal government is revamping the income-driven repayment plans and is going to be releasing guidelines on how they'll be changing that program in 2023. So we anticipate seeing even more improvements in these programs. So be on the lookout for that. That being said, some things will not be changing. And if you're thinking about an income-driven plan, number one, these plans basically take a percent of your what they call disposable income. It's a formula, and they figure out that's what your monthly payment is going to be on the student loans. And once you make payments for 20 or 25 years, depending on the type of loans that you have, the balance is completely forgiven. So even if you have a balance after 25 years of making payments, that balance will be forgiven, but we're going to talk about what the caveats are for that process. So what you want to take into consideration when you're thinking about, signing up for an income-driven plan or reviewing the plan that you're in, some of these repayment plans do not cap the payment amount. If you have a career trajectory or have an income that you anticipate will greatly increase over time, you want to be careful that you are paying attention to your monthly payment amount, because if you are, if you're making a little money in the beginning of your career and your student loan balance continues to grow because your payments are very small and the interest just keeps accruing on top, then you might have a very large balance. And when your income increases, the monthly payment will increase commensurate with your income. And when you have a really large monthly payment, then you might end up burning through your student loan balance before you even get to forgiveness. So you want to keep checking in with your student loan payment and the income-driven repayment plan to make sure it's still a good fit for you. If your income were to increase greatly, you might want to consider refinancing at that point and getting into the private loan world to be able to pay off your loans quicker. Another consideration you need to take into account with the income-driven repayment plans is your tax filing status. Some of the income-driven repayment plans take married couples as a joint unit, and they consider both partners that are married and filing jointly or married filing separately as one unit to determine the monthly payment. So if you carry a lot of student loans, but you don't have a high income, but your partner does, and you guys are married, then their income might affect your personal student loan payment. There are some individuals and just income their student loan payment, and that can make a material difference for some disparate incomes. Something to pay attention to. Lastly, we talked a little bit about after 20 or 25 years of payments, your student loan balance will be forgiven. It would be an exciting day, but of course, there's a catch, and the catch is tax liability. So any forgiven amount at that forgiveness point will be taxed as regular income for that year. So when I'm working with clients who are thinking about pursuing forgiveness, we always want to plan for that tax event. Now, granted, 40% or 35% or 28%, whatever tax bracket you end up being in at the time of forgiveness, is less than paying 100% of your balance, but it is something you want to plan for. So you just want to start saving up money for that eventual tax event. And look, if the legislation changes and they finally, correct this issue of having tax liability on forgiven student loans, then you'll just have a bunch of money sitting around, which is always a good thing to have, no matter what. So we like to plan for it. And there is some precedent now for tax-free student loan forgiveness. We've seen that during the pandemic, and we anticipate that when enough people are starting to qualify for this income-driven repayment forgiveness, there will also be an upswell of support for tax-free forgiveness. But it hasn't happened yet, so we do need to plan for it. In terms of the income-driven repayment plans, right now we are in a period where the federal government is trying to revamp them. And some things that they're doing right now, you might be even seeing some of these adjustments in your own student loan accounts, is adjusting for how many payments count toward forgiveness. As I said, with each of the plans, whether you're dealing with undergrad loans or graduate loans, you either have a forgiveness timeline of 20 years or 25 years. So basically, you're getting credit toward those years, toward your forgiveness timeline, each time that you make a payment toward your loans. What has happened over the time period that the government has been administering these plans is that payments haven't been counted accurately, and they're trying to correct that. So there's a few different ways where you might be able to get credit for more payments than maybe is reflected in your current student loan account. And this is something that can be really powerful when you're actually getting toward the end of your forgiveness timeline. So now the federal government is going back through records and trying to figure out where people steered toward forbearance. Forbearance is basically when the service providers, you call up your loan service provider and you say, I can't afford some of my payments. And they say, okay, well, if you don't have any money, you can go into forbearance, which means that interest will continue to accrue on your loans, but you won't have to make any payments. They do this because of economic hardship, if you're in between jobs. And so the service providers, instead of steering people to income-driven repayment plans, which for some people could have a payment amount of 0 if your income is low enough, and still count toward forgiveness, they were steering them to forbearance instead. And those months didn't count as payments toward their forgiveness timeline. So the government is going back and seeing where were people steered toward forbearance and trying to give you credit months. There is a process by which they're going to automatically look through forbearance time periods and add those payments into people's student loan account. If you disagree with that process or with the conclusion, you can file a complaint with the FSA Ombudsman to get your account recounted and to make sure you're getting credit for all of the months where you should have not have been in forbearance and should have been in an income-driven repayment plan instead. Secondly, they're readjusting what counts as a qualifying payment. The income-driven repayment plans, as I mentioned in the beginning, you have to sign up for them. You have to proactively be part of the program. Many people weren't told about these programs when they were started, and their service providers didn't say, hey, you would be a great fit for an income-driven repayment plan. And so if you have been in any type of repayment plan, graduated repayment, extended graduated repayment, the 10-year standard, all of those payments will now count toward the forgiveness timeline for the income-driven repayment plans. And so we also want to see those payments adjusted and counted as part of your total toward your forgiveness timeline. Lastly is relooking at deferments. Any time spent in an economic hardship deferment prior to 2013 should now be counted. So if you were out of a job or you had some sort of if there was an issue with your family and you were unable to make your student loan payments and you went into deferment, you might be able to get those months counted toward your forgiveness timeline. So why do I go through all of these very specific details related to the repayment plans? Because it can be a really important, it can make a really big difference when you're counting up all of the months toward a forgiveness timeline. And so we want to make sure that you're getting credit for all of the payments or the non-payments or the months where you could have been making payments prior. You want to make sure all of that. Under the public service Loan Forgiveness Program. This is like the golden goose of the forgiveness programs for the federal student loans. This is the one that so many people talk about, is because it's one of the best ones, right? But there were a lot of hoops to jump through in order to qualify for this program. And that's why many people have been very frustrated with how the government has administered it, because they thought that they would get forgiveness and then they determined that they were ineligible. So let's go through all of the steps that you need to qualify for public service loan forgiveness. You need to have the right type of loan, which means that you need to have a direct loan. We already discussed that that's a federal loan, but it's a specific type of federal loan. And so those are the ones that you want to make sure that you have in order to qualify for public service loan. You want to be working for a qualified employer. That means you're working for a government employer, any level of government, federal, state, or local, or you are working for a 501c3, or you are working for some other nonprofits. So you want to be thinking about, if you work for a hospital that is a nonprofit, if you work for a school that is a nonprofit, you work for, any level of government. If you're working in your local government, then you are probably working for a qualified employer and you might qualify for this program. The third step is you need to be in the right repayment plan. We talked about income-driven repayment plans. Those are the plans that you want to be in order to qualify for public service loan forgiveness. If you've just been, making payments on your loans through a different repayment plan that your service provider offered you when you first went back into repayment, you want to make sure that you're in an income-driven repayment plan, because those are the ones that get counted. You also need to certify your employer on an annual basis. You don't necessarily have to do it annually, but because record keeping is not the government's best job, nor your employer's, you want to be on top of it and make sure that you're getting credit for all of the years that you work for your employer. And then magically, after you make 120 qualifying payments, then the balance of your student loans are forgiven. It can be a wonderful day. That being said, you have to jump through all of these hurdles first to get there. And the 120 qualifying payments do not need to be consecutive. It's cumulative. So if you work for the government for a few years and then you go do something else for a private employer and then you go back to the government, as long as you have 10 years of payments cumulatively, you can get 100% forgiveness of all of your federal loans. But you need to keep those records and you need to have all of that stuff certified. Now, there is a limited waiver opportunity for the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program that has greatly expanded the reach of the program. As I mentioned, when this program came out in 2007, no one understood how it worked. The service educating their clients about what they needed to do to qualify. People found themselves 10 years later believing that they were going to qualify for loan forgiveness and finding out they had the wrong loan, they were in the wrong repayment plan, or they were working for the wrong employer, and they were very, very upset. So the government, for a limited time period, is offering a waiver of many of the hurdles that you needed to jump through in order to qualify for forgiveness. This waiver expires on October 31st, 2022. That's when you need to have consolidated any non-qualifying loans in order to get into the program. That's why it was so important for Amy and I to be able to put on this presentation now to make sure that you guys could take advantage of this time-sensitive opportunity. So like I said, you need to have the right kind of loan to qualify for public service loan forgiveness. If you remember way back in the beginning of the slides, we talked about all the different types of federal loans that are out there. Some of those federal loans are actually, they're quasi-federal loans, and I'm speaking specifically about the FFEL loans. Those are the old Stafford loans. If you're old like me, you probably had a couple of them. They did not qualify for public service loan forgiveness. And a lot of people didn't realize that because they thought that they had federal loans. So for a limited time, you can consolidate these quasi-federal loans into a direct loan and have it all qualify for forgiveness. But you need to do that consolidation by October 31st of 2022 in order to be able to qualify. You still need to work for a qualifying employer. That's not a hurdle that they're getting rid of. But with respect to the repayment plans, they're also going to be counting any payments that you made on any of these potentially eligible loans, whether you were in an income-driven repayment plan or graduated repayment plan, extended graduated, all of those payments will count. And so it is really broadening how many people can get access to this type of forgiveness. You still have to certify that you worked for a qualifying employer. But now that so many more payments are qualifying, it's becoming much easier for people to reach the 120 that they've been, hoping that and thinking that they would be able to get much faster. And so, if you even haven't any idea or any thought that you work for a qualifying employer, this is absolutely something to check out and look into. Could have all of your loans forgiven. I've had some clients who have worked for the government for over 10 years, but had the wrong kind of loans. And through this waiver program, they've had their entire loan balance forgiven. So it is happening, they are fixing it, and it is worthwhile. Just to give you another sense of, how these the limited waivers and the changes to the income-driven repayment are working out for real people. I had someone who, he wasn't even a client of mine. He just had questions about student loans. And I love talking about student loans, as you can tell. And so he reached out and we were just talking about the income-driven repayment changes to the program and the forbearances and all of the deferments that were now being counted. And when he went back and was thinking about his career trajectory, he had taken a few breaks from work. Payment plan instead was put into forbearance, and it that he is going to get his public service loan forgiveness through due to all of the extra payments that are being counted, and he is going to have $287,000 forgiven. So his entire career trajectory has now changed in a really exciting way. And so I wanted you to hear real stories of real people who are having their lives changed by taking advantage of these programs. All right, the last repayment strategy is the repay your way, right? This is where we're getting a little bit more creative about what we might have to do. These are for my folks who have a total debt load that is probably somewhere in the same range as your annual income. This means that forgiveness isn't necessarily a clear option because you might pay back the loans before you get to forgiveness, and repaying them off as quickly as possible doesn't feel great because your salary doesn't really match up with being able to make those really large payments. So what do we want to be paying attention to? We want to take a look at all of your financial goals, right? Like I said, student loans are just one aspect of overall financial plan, and you don't want them to overshadow everything else that's good. You have a life to live, you have dreams, you might have children, a partner, a family that you want to provide for. And those things are important to take into account when you are trying to figure out, where do student loans fit into the overall mix? Second, you want to think about, how do you feel about your student loans? I have many clients who find their student loan debt to be an emotional toll. And so when it is really weighing you down, you want to be careful and make sure that you are paying attention. If it is the number one priority for you, maybe we do need to pay it off faster than, the numbers would say that you should. It's something you want to at least give weight to. But if you don't feel overburdened by your student loan debt, then maybe it's not our number one priority, and we don't have to let it overshadow everything. And lastly, we want to think about the flexibility. Student loan repayment strategies are long-term. Right? This buckling pay off $200,000 about going to give us the ultimate flexibility over the trajectory of the repayment strategy. Like I said earlier, there are only a few moves that we cannot take back. For example, refinancing your federal loans into private, that's irreversible, but we want to give ourselves flexibility over time. So that might mean taking a longer repayment term at an earlier point in your career where you're not making as much money to give yourself a little bit more cash flow, and then getting more aggressive later when you have more resources available to throw at your student loans. But thinking through, different creative ways to attack it, I think is important in paying attention to your entire life trajectory. So some things to consider if this is, the strategy that you're going to be pursuing. Pay attention to your interest rates. Generally speaking, right, we don't want to be paying down student loans that are at a very low interest rate, especially if we have other debt that we're carrying that is at a higher interest rate, or if, we're paying down low interest debt instead of pursuing other long-term savings goals. So we want to make sure that, we're treating the student loan debt with respect, but if it's low interest student loan debt, then it might not need to be a high priority at all. You also want to be paying attention to all of these relief programs. In addition, there might be more relief programs through your employers, and you want to pay attention to any programs that might be available. If you work for a private employer that is trying to recruit people that might have a lot of student loan debt, they may have a program where they help pay some of that off. The CARES Act now allows employers to pay up to $5,250 per year per employee, and this is all tax-free, so it's a win for the employer and a win for the employee. And so this could be, part of your compensation. Also, if you're working for certain federal agencies, there is a federal student loan repayment assistance program where you can get free money on top of your salary just to go toward your federal student loans. Now, you usually have to sign a contract that you will stay at the agency for a certain number of years, but that can be another way to help, cut down on your student loans. Lastly, we want to think about, are there going to be other times in your career trajectory or during your long-term financial planning where you will be able to use future investments or the growth from future investments to make large payments toward your student loans? It's one thing to set up a 20-year payoff timeline and you just trudge through it every month making your payment and that's all you do. You can make a lot of headway by throwing large chunks of money at your student loans at the right time, right? So when bonuses come in, if you end up selling your house in a market that seems to be completely crazy, and you want to take some of that to attack some of your student loans, those are things you want to be thinking about to creatively come up with strategies where, the student loan is just not this thing that you do for your entire life, but it is something that you attack in a way that is really strategic. So some examples of some more creative ways to attack some of these student loans, using equity in your home. I think there is a lot of there's a lot of advice out there about whether to a home for something like this, really personal decision, but you just want to be careful about it, and you probably want to seek out some professional help if you're thinking about doing something like this. But it can be a really powerful strategy if you've built up a lot of equity in a home or an investment property to be able to leverage that to wipe out student loan debt. Also, again, thinking about if you are refinancing private loans, getting that interest rate down as much as you can, and still paying down on federal loans, but maybe the interest rates are very low, right? There's a lot of different ways that you can attack things. You want to look at your entire picture and try to put together a strategy that makes sense not only now, but will also make sense for you as you move forward. And so I do also want to quickly go over the new student loan debt announced related to both the extension of the payment pause and related to forgiveness. So if you have federal loans, I've been getting this question now for 2 years, should you be making payments toward them? It depends on what your goals are. If you are working toward paying them off and you have no problem making those payments, I have told all of my clients, please don't send the government any money. Please just save that money until the end of the payment pause. You can make a large bulk payment toward your student loans right before the payment pause ends. It has now been extended multiple times. And so, we've already seen that, we don't know exactly when the payment pause is going to end. So I've told all of my clients, just hold that money and you can make a big payment toward your loans if you decide you're still, planning on paying them off as soon as the 0% interest and 0 payment pause ends. If you are working toward forgiveness, you should absolutely not be making any payments. All of the months during the payment pause count toward your forgiveness timeline. So all those $0 payments count as a full payment toward the timeline, whether it's the 10 years for public service loan forgiveness or the 20 or 25 years for the income-driven repayment. So nobody who's working toward forgiveness should be making any payments toward their federal loans. We also want to make sure that before you're sending money to the government for your loans, when they're not requiring you to send them any, you have a sufficient emergency fund. There might be other financial goals that you want to be making headway on that are more important than making additional payments on your student loans when you don't necessarily have to be making them. So that's something that you want to be paying attention to. There's been a lot of talk in the news about the most recent student loan debt relief program. This provides up to $20,000 of debt cancellation for federal loans. How does this work? The first eligibility requirement is you need to have an annual income in 2020 or 2021. The government is going to take the lesser of the two. And the requirement is you have to have made less than $125,000 if you are a single filer or if you are married and file your taxes separately. Or $250,000 if you are married and filing jointly or you file as head of a household. So, it's meant to give the relief to the people, who could use some extra help paying off their student loans. If you were ever a Pell Grant recipient, then you qualify for $20,000 of debt relief. And that means that you received a Pell Grant at any point in college for any amount. We've heard of people who have received Pell Grants for as little $200. That is a Pell Grant, and that will tip you up to the $20,000 debt relief qualifier. If you did not receive a Pell Grant in college, then you qualify for $10,000. And what loans does this apply? Federal loans, right? This is a federal debt relief program. This applies to federal loans. And they need to have been dispersed prior to June 30th of 2022, so June of this year. There is a long list of loans that these apply to, including graduate loans. So if you have student loan debt from law school, it applies. Parent plus loans. If you took out loans for your children to go to undergrad, you can get up to $10,000 or $20,000 of that canceled out. And so, that is a really, really broad swath of federal loans that it applies to. Again, the studentaid.gov website has done an amazing job of breaking down how all of this is going to work and answering questions. Like Crystal said in the beginning, this is being recorded. I'm also going to be sending around links to all of the resources that I've mentioned, so you guys have it in a handy spot to be able to look up whether you would qualify for all of this relief. So if you are looking at getting some debt relief from this $10,000 or $20,000 program, this is the steps that you want to go through. You want to double check your income and make sure that you qualify at either the $125,000 or $250,000 level. And remember, again, this could be 2020 or 2021. Many of my clients had a huge dip in income in 2020, and so they're going to qualify even though their 2021 income would make them ineligible. You also want to make sure that your information is updated on studentaid.gov and with your student loan service providers, so that they can contact you when the application becomes available, and also make sure that you will get all the information about any debt relief that you are granted. If you made payments on your federal loans, right? If you weren't one of my clients who was just putting all of your student loan payment pause money into a savings account, and you've paid off either your loans entirely, or the balance of your student loans is now lower than the $10,000 or $20,000 of relief that you qualify for, you can request a refund of those payments. So any payments that you made after March 13th of 2020, you can request a refund from your service provider, but save that refund money until all of the debt relief has been provided. We don't want to, get anything mucked up in the process. Lastly, if you are one of those folks out there that has not yet consolidated your FFEL loans, whether that be for public service loan forgiveness purposes or for income-driven repayment plans, I highly suggest that you consider it. To being able to take advantage of the public service loan forgiveness waiver is a huge boon that is going to go away. Also, these loans do not qualify for debt relief if they haven't been consolidated into a direct loan. So there are few reasons not to consolidate them right now, but of course you do want to take a look at what we mentioned earlier in terms of the interest capitalization, and the interest rate may change for your loan. You want to pay attention to that. But if you're aiming for forgiveness, then on balance, it will probably make sense to consolidate them. And there is going to be we understand that the government will automatically be providing this debt relief to people whose information they think they can figure out on their own. That being said, the guidance is to apply. There will be an application. It will be coming out in early October, and I will be sending around the link to where you can sign up to get the alert as soon as the application becomes available. But you do want to make sure that you apply. You never want to be in a position where you thought that you would qualify, you thought the government would do it for you, and then you miss an eventual deadline. So apply, apply, apply. When making a plan for your own student loans, that's it, right? This was so easy. Thank you, Jessica. This was so great. No questions, perfectly simple. It's just the easiest thing to figure out, right? I understand this is not simple. It's not easy. It takes, a lot of knowledge gathering to even figure out your situation, and then to apply all of these programs to your potential situation and try to figure out what might be a good fit. But there are steps that you can take, and a lot of it is just gathering all the data into one place, right? A lot of us didn't even know how much we owe before we start looking at it. So let's make your plan. I offer a free 10-day email series to walk you through everything you need to know in order to figure out the best repayment strategy for you. You can get it on my website at www.jessicamedinallc.com/student loan series. It's totally free, and it will walk you through all the information you need to gather and how to do some of these evaluations to figure out what plan might make sense for you. But you want to be tracking down all of your loans, right? You want to, you'll get access to online calculators that I use with my own clients to help them figure out which repayment plan might make more sense. You want to be checking out those refinance rates. Many of you have probably heard interest rates have been all over the place the past few years, totally down in the toilet and now rising, rising, rising. So you want to pay attention to where refinance rates are for student loans if you're thinking about taking that step. And of course, your repayment strategy is not a one-time evaluation. You want to be thinking through strategically, at least on an annual basis, are you still in the right strategy? Has anything changed with your career, with your life, with the relief programs that make it prudent to pick a different strategy at a different point? So you want to be checking in periodically and make sure that the repayment strategy still makes sense for you. Again, I'm going to be sharing links to all of the different resources that I've mentioned today when we send around the recording, but studentaid.gov really is a wonderful website, and you should check it out if you have any questions about the federal student loan programs or about how this $10,000 or $20,000 debt relief is going to work. They've done a really bang up job on trying to make it as easy as possible for folks. I also have plenty of blog posts and interviews with other student loan experts on my website where you can hear about tax strategies. You can figure out, which types of repayment plans might work for you. Also, Student Loan Planner is a wonderful resource. I really respect Travis Hornsby and what he's done. They're a for-profit company. They do offer a lot of free resources in helping you plan for student loans, but they also offer consulting services if you want someone to just figure it out for you. So there is a fee, but it can be worthwhile if you're feeling paralyzed and what to do next. College Loan Freedom is another for-profit company. They will actually manage the forgiveness portion of the record keeping if you're going toward public service loan forgiveness in particular, or even income-driven repayment, and you feel overwhelmed by the process itself. They can help you maneuver that process, make sure you're getting all of your certifications in on time, and that you're getting the use of the forgiveness programs in the most cost-effective way. So please stay connected with me. You can sign up for my mailing list. I send out emails to my list on personal finance tips for lawyers. Connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty prolific on there, posting a lot about student loans, but also about other things affecting lawyers. And I will be holding an exclusive student loan Q&A just for the folks on my wait list. And you can sign up for that at jessicamedinallc.com/. I know we covered a lot today, so let me know what questions you guys have about things we've covered or other things that have come up in your student loan journey.
Jessica, so we have 2 questions, and while I'm going through these 2 questions, please, if you have any other questions about anything that Jessica talked about, please put it in the chat. And Jessica, thank you so much. I'm grateful to be on the other side of this because my loans were from long ago, but it is truly overwhelming. And so every bit of information, it's just really just amazingly valuable. So thank you. Okay, first question. How do you find out if forbearances and deferments were applied? And how do you go about getting this applied for, or making sure that it gets applied? So I know you mentioned that you should be proactive about it, but is that studentaid.gov? Is that where you go to find this information, or are there other places?
So I would start with your loan service provider. Now, granted, loan service providers have changed over the years, but you want to check back at any point where you weren't making payments on your student loans. If, for example, you remember right after you graduated from law school, you had to take a year, you got deferred from, with your job, and you had to go do something else. And so you weren't making payments on your student loans. That probably was a forbearance. If you had any other, job loss or medical issues that prevented you from being able to make payments on your student student loans, that was probably a forbearance. And so you want to go back through the records with your actual loan service provider. You can call them and just contact them and go through your payment history, but you want to look for gaps in payments because that will show you where the forbearance is. I'm not sure if all of that payment history would be on studentaid.gov, but it would definitely be with the loan service provider.
Great, thank you. The next question, I have my federal loans consolidated, but I want to add my one private commercial bar exam loan to the consolidation. Is this possible? And how do I find out who the service provider of my private loan would be? I called my service provider, Mohila and Federal Student Aid, but they could not help.
So the private bar loan cannot be consolidated with federal loans. Private loans and federal loans don't mix. And once something is, if something starts private or ever becomes private, it can never go back to being federal. So to answer the first question, you cannot consolidate the bar loan in. Secondly, you can find out who owns your bar loan by checking your credit report. So download your credit report from annualcreditreport.com and your bar loan should be on there. Discover is a pretty popular bar loan service provider. I'm trying to think of, it's probably just owned by a bank. And so you should be getting statements from them, but unfortunately you can't consolidate it in with the federal. The only thing you could do with your private bar loan is consider refinancing it. You can always refinance a private loan. It's just like any other loan out there. So if it's at a very high interest rate, a lot of bar loans come out at 11 to 13%, which is fairly high for a student loan. You could refinance that loan down to something closer to maybe 4, 5, or 6%, and also think about extending the payment term if the payments are unmanageable right now. You could, take out a 7-year, give yourself 10 years to pay it off. And then as you bring in more money over the course of your career, you can make extra payments toward that and, and get more aggressive toward it. But once you're in the private loan sphere, all you can do is refinance to another private loan.
Thank you. And if anybody who's asking questions has follow-ups, feel free to throw it in the chat. Great question from a law student. How do you feel about paying off loans while in law school?
So this is such a great question. I think if you can at least pay the interest on your student loans while you're in school, you will graduate just with the principal, which is different than most people, right? A lot of people take out loans in undergrad and have them in school in deferment for the entirety of their legal career, of their law school career, right? So then you graduate with loans that have been accruing interest for, 5, 6, 7 years at that point. So to the extent that you can make payments toward your law school loans during law school, at least to cover the interest, I do advise that you get that done. That being said, if making those payments is going to make law school really hard for you, let's concentrate on getting through law school. Let's make sure that you get the best experience out of law school and you get your money's worth from there. But if you can make payments at least toward the interest, then that's great. If you want to pay off your loans early, I think it really depends on where they sit in your overall financial planning strategy. If you're not doing anything else with that money and you want to get your law school loans paid off, I do support people paying off their law school loans. I just normally run into people who have other things on their plate as well.
Thank you, Jessica. And I have a question while we give everybody a chance. If you have any other questions, get them in the Q&A now before we wrap up. You mentioned the October 31st deadline and that you're going to be sending out information with the recording. Is there anything, what is the timeline for that deadline? Do people need to be doing something today or tomorrow? Like, how time consuming is getting things done facing something that is 5 or 6 weeks away?
So I think the first thing that you want to check is going on studentaid.gov and seeing what kinds of loans you have. And if you have any FFEL loans, those are the ones that will pop up on studentaid.gov, but they also will be on your credit report. So I think the most important thing is to figure out whether you have any loans that need to be consolidated. A lot of A lot of people actually consolidate right after they graduate from law school. And so they just have one direct consolidation loan. If you already have that, don't worry about the deadline. You're good. You already have, you've already done everything you have to do. Not everyone needs to consolidate. There is just a small population of people that will benefit from consolidation. And those are people that have loans that are not direct loans. So if you have anything on your record on studentaid.gov or anything on your credit report that is not a direct loan, that's what you want to think about consolidating. And I will say consolidation is a fairly seamless process that you do straight on studentaid.gov. You just start selecting which federal loans you want to consolidate. And so they'll all show up there. And so just look for anything that doesn't say direct. And that's what you want to think about, maybe consolidating into a direct loan before October 31st.
Terrific, thank you. So last call on the questions. While I thank Jessica for all of this amazing information, and thank you all for attending. As Jessica mentioned, she will be sending a recording of today's presentation as well as the resources that she mentioned. So you will have everything handy. So do not worry if you missed anything. If you were taking notes, it will all come to you with the websites and everything else. And then we are planning future webinars on all different relevant topics for law students and junior lawyers. So keep an eye out. Our next webinar will be on November 15th at noon Eastern, and that will be covering resume and LinkedIn tips. So again, we'll be getting out information on that shortly. And Jessica, many, many thanks for your time and insights today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. Again, Amy, I'm so excited for this organization. I want to check out LinkedIn tips. That sounds useful for everyone. And again, you know, to everyone out there, student loans are complicated. It's okay. Ask the questions that you need, find some resources. You'll be getting many from me, but also really, if you have anything in the federal loan world, studentaid.gov is a wonderful resource. Start poking around. You're going to learn a lot, and things could get better very quickly.
Thank you, Jessica. Thanks everyone for joining. Have a great rest of the day.